So in the rest of the introduction, I want to briefly explain the framing that I use for this analysis in the first part. So I want to focus on public universities as a subset of higher education institutions. And I explain in the paper for you why I make this choice, why I focus on public universities and not higher education institutions largely. Mainly it comes down to them being the oldest and the most prominent, and their relationship with the state having somewhat shaped how the state deals with other higher education institutions and newer universities. So I borrow from Van Voot's framing of state-university relationship as a continuum from state supervision to state control. The state supervision model, which we have borrowed from the British colonial system, privileges institutional autonomy of universities, even though it also requires accountability to the state and to considerations of national needs. There's a lot more to it, but this is in brief. The state control model is where the state exercises direct authority over universities. So beyond legislations and regulations like we have in the state supervision model, the state might appoint principal officers, determine budget of academic programming, and make key decisions regarding the operations of the universities. This is of course a continuum. We tend to be more on the state supervision side, but I'd like to point out that we can move on this continuum over time. It's also possible that a state might vary its orientation to different aspects of universities. So it might have a state attempting to exert more control over university leadership than, say, on workers' unions, or try to exert more control on finances versus governance. So it's a little more complicated than just we are on this side and other universities on that side. The other frames that I use, which I borrow from policy theories, is the historical institutionalist lens, which helps us to understand path dependence, like I explained before. And then there's also a punctuated equilibrium theory that looks at how policies tend to be stable over time, but then might change based on some significant events. I won't bore you, it's in the paper. If you're interested, you can read it. I just want to point out that there is some method to all of this.
What has happened between 2015, 2016, thereabout, and now, in that space of reform that I have been very directly involved in. But I've had a much broader perspective on the issue from the presentation. There are some very key issues that have been raised in terms of autonomy, academic freedom, optimal autonomy, the purpose of the public university, what the role of the state must be like. And the more I listened to it, the more I thought, we seem to have a lot of consensus. There seems to be agreement, what the university should be doing from the state side and from the side of the universities. But why have we been in this constant, there has been quite some tensions, in the relationship. It seems to me that I think we need to make a lot more effort, perhaps, in dealing with the divergent interests. We talked about UTAG, students. I think it's the same thing that applies at the interface between the state and the universities. A lot of the time it appears we do not actually have an open mind. They are mutual suspicious. And so even when an idea is floated that is an excellent one, even before we have had a chance to understand exactly what the rationale is, it's framed as a contentious issue, and before we stage that we are fighting and we don't even know why we are fighting. So yes, I've learned a lot from that. I've also had some insight from the reviewers, and I think going forward from here, I'm sure when I begin to compile my own memoirs about my time at NCT and GTech, there will be a lot of references to the original paper and the reviews as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity.